Looks like we're recording. Welcome and welcome back to the Enolve podcast, where we talk about problem solving. Whenever you find yourself having a problem, you can use the Enolve method to find a solution. And today we'll talk about communication challenges. And communication between two people is usually that they need to get on the same wavelength and need to be able to, well, meet themselves at whatever it is they're talking about. And sometimes that can be difficult when one of the people's brains functions differently than another person's brain. And so for that, I have an expert here with me. His name is Christopher Fern, and he helps people make fulfilling decisions on demand, regardless of the emotional state. Christopher, that really sounds super interesting and totally up along the lines of Enolve and everything. So thank you so much for coming on here. Can you tell us a little bit about what is your background and how did you get to be where you are today?
That's an interesting story. Thank you for having me, Oliver. I'm really grateful that we're here. My background is in computer information systems and software engineering. Nothing to do with well, actually everything to do with communication, because even us communicating right now is very dependent on taking an image of you and an image of me read by a little digital device, encoding that information, transmitting it in only on or off signals, and then decoding it quick enough for us to have an experience. So ideally, that's how communication would go. We are not computers. So it gets a little complicated. For the first 20 years of my life, I was a corporate technology guy. I was the CTO of an international company. I had a web design business. I built a lot of custom coded stuff, so I'm pretty much I can code anything still. And it wasn't until I started to really understand that as I was communicating, I wasn't being received. I was putting out as like I was obsessing about being clear, and I was obsessing about having the details in the conversation that I thought people needed. I was listening to what they told me that they would want to receive, and I was giving that back to them, only to find that was in the wrong way or in the wrong context. There's something wrong about how I'm communicating, or I wasn't addressing their bigger issue, or I wasn't on the same page, or I was doing things in a way that was self-centered, or any of these judgments that I just didn't feel were true, because my only MO was to relay an idea. And as I explored relaying these ideas to my bosses, to my managers, to my people in my life, my friends, and my partners at the time, I was often labeled as making excuses, or not being accountable or not being responsible. And sure, there's a level of defense that every human will have, but there's also a degree of, like the communication sometimes is, do you understand that if you are asking somebody to do something and they are mentally processing it differently, you're going to get a different outcome. And that seems to be where there's a lot of unspoken roadblocks in communication. Working, more and more in business, I found the same thing. I thought an agreement was clear for like a website or another deal, and come out and they said, no, we expected this. I'm like, but you asked me to do this. But what they were really asking me to do was solve the bigger problem in whatever way I could agree to it. So some specifics, for example, are, I would offer a very specific solution, and they would say, yeah, as long as it solves the problem. Without these people, my clients at the time, wanting to know the cost and liabilities and make all these decisions about solving the problem. They wanted me to do that. But that comes with a sense of expectation to think into the future, an expectation to know how things are going to go, or as a lot of people say, responsibility and accountability, which I think is a broken model. I'll get to that in a bit. It's important that we are accountable for what we do and that we take responsibility, but responsibility isn't given, it's taken. It's not imposed, it's received and chosen. That's a whole nother part that I can get into. So I spent the majority of my early life, I'm like 35 now, so I say my early life, I mean my 20s, building this system to try to resolve my own internal conflict around how to communicate to other people. But really, it came down to me seeing these same communication challenges in myself, and usually manifested in the form of money and finances, because one type of decision that somebody makes in one instance is just a microcosm of every other type of decision that they make. We find this in procrastination, we find this with anxiety, anything. The way you are is the way you are. No matter where you go, there you are. So I found that I was like, in some instances, very committed to a particular expense or desire, and then 3 days later didn't care. Well, if my mood shifts that quickly, like other neurodivergence moods do, then what does that mean about my integrity? What does that mean about my ability to be trusted? What does that mean about this person who I said I was attracted to and wanted to have some kind of interaction with, and now 3 days later I could give two shits? And then we get into these social issues that I'm not going to touch on this call that have a lot to do with that are up right now. Feminism, patriarchy. I mean, I'll name them, right? The whole legal issue that just happened here in America. All these things are now coming to a head because of the integrity of the word, of provision, of saying and giving. So I realized I did the same thing for my own finances, and I would often be overdrafted, and I would often have a number of credit cards, and I would have to pay back debts, and I would think things are important one week and they weren't the next week, and it was just chaos. So I had to find a way to be consistent while also still being happy. As somebody who's neurodiverse and whose mind works fundamentally differently, I realized that I needed to do some things that brought me joy, even if they had some patterns that others would judge. But I couldn't obsess over those things. I couldn't use all of my resources on those things. I had to titrate. How much do I titrate? Well, that was what I had to look into. So now when we're talking communication between two people, what I evolved this whole line of questioning into over 20 years, I've been looking at this since I got my first job, is how can we, given our limitation of space or time or energy or physical matter, how can we effectively get to a goal while also being aware of the fact that we're not aware of everything in a given moment? And if we're particularly emotional, or if we have a wave of emotion, or if we're feeling abundant, or if we're feeling scarce or whatever, how can we trust? Because a lot of people don't realize this, but when you change emotional states, all your priorities shift. And discipline is a way of saying, nope, that emotional state doesn't matter. Me right now doesn't matter. I need to do this thing. It's the hustle culture. And planning is nothing more than trying to feel good about what you're about to do. Every decision is an emotional one, including communication. And that's what I had to learn.
Wow, man, thank you so much for elaborating that and going into all these different topics. And it seems to permeate every aspect of life, huh? And which, I mean, obviously, if we talk about the brain processing things, right, that is the ultimate barrier for us, that we're, I don't want to say trapped inside, because we're not trapped, but that's our paradigm. We can't get outside of the paradigm of our own brain. And so if that's how we see and perceive the world, just like I said, those emotions that come up day to day, they change like the weather, they cloud our perception, and they have us making decisions. They have us perceive problems in the world. When one day we saw a problem, the next day we don't see a problem. They have us acting irrationally and everything. And just like you said at the beginning, we're not computers, right? I mean, we try to be rational, civilized, and like logical humans and everything, but at the end of the day, we're still like, we're flesh and blood and everything. And so there's a lot of chaos and craziness going on. Exactly. And yeah, that leads to conflict and challenges sometimes, and it would be nice if we could find ways to resolve them. So man, I mean, I
Where do you want to go with this, man?
Yeah, and I'm one more thing that you pointed out at the beginning too, that really sounded quite frustrating, is that whole speaking without being received, right? And just that disconnect, right? I mean, that must be really isolating, and lots of things that I don't even want to get into, because let's not complain about the problem, but okay, we identified there's some stuff going on. What do you suggest is to be done? I mean, is there system structures, or is there something that people generally overlook?
We haven't identified the problem.
Oh, we haven't. Okay.
We've identified the symptoms.
Okay.
So if you want to get into the problem, I'll take a few minutes to do that. because it's important in the context of the solutions. Is that okay?
That's
Cool.
perfect. That's what we're
Here's
all
the
about.
problem. It's really simple. There's three main things. We talked about the brain working a little bit differently. So the brain working differently, what does that mean? Well, I'm just going to cut right to it and say neurodiversity, autism, ADHD. That's what I work with. In those examples, the biggest contributor to the brain working differently is the primary strategy of operating, which is anxiety management. The reason for that is because the limbic system, the input system of our bodies, normally when it's stimulated, it activates the prefrontal cortex, the thinking mechanism, this evolved sense of being, civilized, as you say. For these people who are ADHD or autistic, it goes right to the amygdala, snake brain, fight or flight, anger, resentment. And that's often held in a, we don't like that as people. We are more civilized than that. Can't you treat me nicely? Oh, I don't deserve that. Why are you getting mad at this one thing that I said? Why are you getting explosive? All I asked you to do was this one thing. These are common things autistic and ADHD people hear, um, among a ton of others, including, you know, you must be narcissistic or you're so self-centered or, why can't you be consistent? Because our primary strategy is to attempt to hold everything together while everything falls apart because we're always anxious in changing states. So solutions are simple. First, we have to be able to, if you don't have this skill, don't communicate. You have to be able to see things from another perspective. So much so that if you can believe that somebody is always overwhelmed, like the camel with the straw on its back, then it's not about it's not about the straw that broke the camel's back. It's about all the other straws. The primary way of functioning becomes different. So as an autistic or ADHD person, once you've identified that you have this predilection, maybe some of the things I said resonated with you, what we can do in communication is slow the F down. We have to be sure that what a person is saying, the words that we're using, because words are symbols for bigger ideas, right? So there's a whole bunch of other stuff that goes on in the autistic mind. I don't have time to get into here on the show, including one of them, I will say though, which is a bigger visual cortex. So we see in pictures, which means if you're asking me a question, the reason I ramble or seem to ramble or paint all these different directions is because I'm making a huge, huge loop and generally talking about a lot of things in a very specific way. The way I do that is by relaying a picture to you. So if we're talking with somebody who values words and specificity and being wholly accurate, and then we're talking, that person speaking with an autistic person or a neurodiverse person, you're going to get somebody who speaks in generalities and goes in and out of rabbit holes to try to relay an abstract concept, and somebody who looks at every single word that's said to see if it fits their model of what words mean. So we really need to slow down. We can't proceed unless there is agreement about the concepts about which we speak. We can't go into declaring truth or agreement until those aspects are identified. So if you say, what is a solution? I'm like, what do you mean? What's a solution? Are we talking about a solution for communication? What type of solution? Because the truth is there is no solution. There is a better. How do you measure a solution? These are all things an autistic mind would think of, or an ADHD mind would think of. But if you say, and I know what you're looking for because I've been in business long enough, but it's because I've been in business that I know what you're looking for. If you engage somebody who doesn't have that understanding, they will talk all over the place and seem confusing because they haven't honed in the language that represents the idea because they're trying to summarize a huge picture in their head. So we need to slow down. We need to define the words that we're using and not like, what do you mean by that? Like, what are the aspects of that word for you? What are the aspects of that word for me? Where is there overlap and where is there difference? Because I would bet you if you do just that, it'll really slow down a conversation. But if you do just that, you'll see that one person's operating from a certain playbook and another person's operating from a different playbook. Another thing that we can do is we know that the neurodiverse person gets overloaded, we need to establish a way of communicating that and then be compassionate to it. So as an autistic person, I will say to people in my life, I'm an 8 out of 10. And I know if I hit 7, even 6 most of the time, it's best if I step away and calm down. That means because when I hit 7 or 6, I get fundamentally dumber according to science, as does everybody. If you think of a time when you got so enraged that you said things you didn't mean, that's every day for a neurodiverse person. So if I get my anxiety, and then what do? We bottle it in and we get internal and we get self-flagellating and we get low self-esteem because we can't express that in society. So what we have to do is be able to be compassionate to, all right, I'm getting overwhelmed way before you think I will, because it's not about the straw, it's about all the other straws. Okay, I'm getting overwhelmed, I need to step away. Or maybe you can't even say that if you're listening to this and you're neurodiverse. Give a number rating, 1 to 10. I'm a 7 or I'm an 8. I mean, stop, even if you don't think we should stop, even if you have a story about what stopping means, even if you, what do I mean by story? I mean, oh, you start to talk to me about something and 2 sentences in, I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I'm not abdicating the conversation, I'm saving it. If you engage me now, I'm going to say shit I don't mean, pardon my French. You can beep that out if you want. So we need to slow down. And we need to respect the mechanism of the mind that is more susceptible to overwhelm. It's not a victim mentality. It's just literally how we are.
Wow, man, you're full of wisdom and different perspectives on it. I love it. And so I really like too how you know, all this overwhelming stuff that you talked about, like here's this, and it's happening in your job and it's happening in relationships, and then on your bank account it manifests as well. But you did boil it down to kind of like, well, it's actually the response to anxiety, and a good picture for that is the camel with the straw in the back, where you know the final straw breaks it down. And then another good point that you made there is the communication, the dictionary that each of us uses to convey concepts. And you know, I mean, if I say a certain thing based on whatever factors contribute to that, your culture, your upbringing, your you know, your brain condition or whatever it is, the meaning of the word might be different than what I think about when I use the word. And that's I've found that creates so many misunderstandings and miscommunications. So really big thing. And then the last one you mentioned there, that self-regulation and kind of being honest with yourself and drawing those boundaries to where interacting with other people is actually, yeah, it's something that you have control over, and that you interact with people in such a manner to where it's a mutually beneficial situation and all of that. So that's good stuff. But even so, with these three kind of, I mean, I don't know if they're action steps. Are they action steps? Do you have an action step for us? Is there something you can do here, or another resource you can point to us?
There is another resource. So I've written a guide that I call the Neurotypical Neurodivergent Translation Guide. I'm probably going to rename it because that's a lot of words. But the basic idea is I want to give people who don't have these issues going on insight into what that feels and looks like. So I've created a set of metaphors, a set of tools, a set of ways to use those tools that it only scratches the surface of what we can bridge. But in using this with several couples, one of whom said I've done more for their marriage and their 30 years of marriage than any therapist or counselor ever has, because I can communicate and translate. I'm like, somebody else called me the autism whisperer. Not my words. I can translate what's going on for the autistic person in a way the neurotypical can understand, or the not autistic person can understand. So in that guide, I do that. You can go to christopherfern.com/communicate and get that guide. You can also book a session with me if you'd like. But I mean, that's like a call to action here. Really, in your day-to-day life, the action step really is just this question: what am I not seeing?
And that's good stuff, man. I'll be sure to link the guide below. And I've taken a look at that guide as well. It is really fascinating, and I always love studying those things. And I think it doesn't matter if you're neurotypical or not. It's just studying these things will, I believe, boost your social skills and your ability to interact and communicate with people. And that's always a good thing. So be sure to check it out. Thank you so much for your time, Christopher, for sharing all those things. I want to have you back on. There's a lot of things we can talk about with this topic. So this is good stuff, right up with what we talked about here with enolve. So we'll drop the link below. Thank you so much, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Take care.